right, I think we can get started now. Don't forget to put any questions you have into the question and answer section. I want to thank everyone for joining tonight and for the interest in the Small Lots Big Impacts competition. We're really excited to hear the buzz that's going on around about the competition and really want to encourage you to submit. We'll explain a lot of that this evening and some of the overall thinking behind the competition, as well as what we have in mind for the kinds of submissions the jury and we are looking for. I want to introduce my two colleagues. The three of us have really organized this competition. Manos Prasaloglu, who's co-director at cityLAB, just waved. Ryan Conroy, who's assistant director for architecture at cityLAB, and really their two minds are the forces behind this whole competition. We've been lucky to have deep partnerships with the Mayor Karen Bass of the City of Los Angeles and many offices that work for her, as well as the LA Housing Department. So this is really emanating from a city and architectural point of view. As you probably know, the design competition is open already for professionals of any design stripe, as well as for students, and those two groups will be distinguished. The title is very descriptive. We really are looking at very small lots that we hope will have very big impacts. And we can go to the next slide. There was a kind of perfect storm. Ryan, are you controlling the slides? Perfect. What we discovered was there was a perfect storm of Los Angeles and probably much broader issues across cities in the United States, at least, that brought this design competition and the theme together. The first was what we're all familiar with, which is our deep housing crisis here in Los Angeles, particularly around attainable and affordable housing. A second were the devastating fires that happened in January. That's left a much greater demand for housing and a scarred landscape that we're all trying to figure out how to address in the recovery. That is related to the third part of this storm, which is the environmental crisis. It's bringing us to think more carefully about sprawl and energy and building in a more fire-resistant manner. But the last was the one that we discovered in a way, and that was this tremendous resource, a kind of unrealized potential in land that the city owns. And here you see these green dots are scattered across the entire city. There are thousands of city-owned small lots under a quarter acre. And the city is really thinking about their 1,000 lots as being models for the tens of thousands of infill lots that are privately held in the map on the right. You go to the next slide. These small lots are scattered, as I said, like confetti across every council district. They're every shape and orientation. They do have this kind of stored energy in them as infill pilot projects, where we might show a Los Angeles that's more compact, more shared, with more home ownership. We're really looking to invent the 21st century starter home. And Los Angeles has a residential fabric that has always been seen as its primary characteristic. It's not just single family homes and suburbs, however. There really is a long history of multifamily housing here. And yet we haven't explored new models for that in the most recent decades. Small lots, big impacts is one way to start thinking through what the next generation of starter homes might be next. Many people have asked, like, where are these lots coming from? How come there are so many? And what's their history? Frankly, each lot has its own individual history, like fingerprints on the city. They might be where roads were widened or where streetcars once passed, as you see here. They could be where a city park was never expanded, or in this particular instance on the left, where layers of bureaucracy and jurisdictions and basic planning rules have been so tangled that no one has been able to realize the potential. And that's really what cityLAB's been working on, and Manos Brasaloglu will explain that a little further.
Yeah, thanks, Dana. So just as a, let's say, kind of specific example of how we've gone about untangling some of those administrative and jurisdictional challenges is how we've been thinking about the sites, both to include in the first stage competition and also in the second stage development team effort. And what you can see on the screen here is kind of our realization and the work that we did in understanding that, okay, there's thousands of potential sites that might be buildable, both city and privately owned, but we needed to look through each and every one of those, really one by one, and really ground truth to see which sites were the most buildable. We use a term a lot at cityLAB of low-hanging fruit, sort of the sites that we were thinking are most developable, sort of most ready to be built on. I think maybe more apt is to say sort of lowest hanging fruit. All of these sites, the publicly owned sites, have their own challenges, but we've really been trying to find sites that have as many green check marks across the way as you can see. So both check marks in kind of, let's say, challenges that are within the city's control, so things that we're working with our partners to try to unlock, and also just kind of physical characteristics that might make development a little bit easier or harder. So the sites that we've really honed in on and the sites that we're hoping to make available in that second stage are the ones that have as many of these green check marks across the board. Thanks, Ryan. So here's just a kind of visual example of what some of those sites look like. Dana, when she was showing the maps a minute ago, talked about how the sites that we're including in this initiative are all under a quarter acre. They're in this particular part in this initiative, they're city owned, and they're underutilized. And this is kind of what these pictures get across. So a lot of these sites are either entirely vacant or kind of fenced in parking lots or pieces of the city that have essentially been sitting forgotten. Part of what we really like about this initiative and part of what the city has gotten really excited about is trying to leverage land that's otherwise, again, sort of sitting forgotten, sitting underutilized in the city, and turn it into a resource that Los Angeles needs and that the mayor's really deeply behind. So here's an example of some of the sites that we've been looking at, and you can see also in the materials that we put together for the design competition, some more specific information about some of them. One other thing I guess I should have said on the last slide, but we can leave it here, Ryan, is all of these sites require architectural ingenuity. That's the other reason that we got really excited about this work and have been pushing it forward, is that, these sites kind of run counter to traditional development approaches, let's say, and need clever, really committed architects to really look at them and try to unlock them. And what's on the screen right now is really the central thesis of the whole project. So back, over a year ago, when we started working with the city on this, we really identified an opportunity here because these lots are forgotten, because these lots are small, to experiment on them and to really kind of push the types of housing that we'd be able to build beyond what is normally within the remit of the type of housing, let's say, the city supports. So that experimentation means, high quality designs, kind of different ways of thinking about gentle density is a word that we use a lot. It also extends to home ownership. All of these sites are intended to be various levels of home ownership, from actual sort of fee simple individual units to community land trusts to cooperatives, these types of ways to actually make long-term ownership of units more attainable for people in Los Angeles. And the image in the background here, a beautiful image by Catherine O.P., is chosen purposefully. If you've read the brief, you'll have recognized sort of this language from the beginning, which is that Los Angeles, over its history, was, let's say, organized as a city built on movement, on fast mobility, on sort of getting places quickly. It's led to a very expansive urban fabric, also building in the urban wildlife interface, like we saw tragically in January. And what we're really trying to do with this initiative, both ourselves and our city partners, is create a city that people can stay, that people who want to live in LA can sort of own a piece of LA, can be here, can build a life here, and to make it, attainable, let's say, and in a way that shows a really beautiful way forward for the city. So important things on this slide. Maybe the most important is what we've underlined there under the design competition. So we've heard with conversations that we've been having with people who are interested in applying that that April 20th deadline might have been a little tight for some offices. So we've talked with our city partners, we've talked with the jurors, and we're going to extend that submission deadline a little bit longer. So we're going to add 2 weeks in the coming days. You'll see all that information updated in the brief and on the website and everything. So it's all kind of, let's say, coherent with each other. But the new deadline for the design competition submission is going to be May 4th. So you guys will have a little bit more time to think through your schemes and work on this. Overall, which again, hopefully you can get this information from the design brief as well if you need a little bit more detail. But there's 2 stages. The stage that we're launching now, that we've just launched, is the design competition stage, open to professionals, designers, and students. So anyone who has a good idea who wants to apply. Multiple winners will be chosen in the professional categories, both in the kind of macro scale. This is what Ryan will talk about in a minute, the gentle density sites and the shared future sites as well. So multiple winners for each site type. And then the student winners will be selected separately. The other thing that I should talk about is kind of how we connect, let's say, this first phase to the second phase. So one thing that we've been grappling with a lot at cityLAB and with our city partners is that the challenges to build on these sites are indeed architectural, but they're also financial, they're also developmental. There's sort of issues that teams need to address in order to really unlock these parcels and be able to build on them. So in the second stage, development teams through an RFQ process led by the Los Angeles Housing Department will submit their qualifications in order to be eligible to win the sites. And what we're hoping for and what we're intending to do is to have the architecture winners supported to help them make sure that they have competitive applications for that second stage, to organize both technical assistance sessions with financial partners that we have, planning partners that we have, the types of people who will really kind of round out an application in a way that'll be compelling and again, competitive in the city's application and selection process in the second stage. You don't have to be an architecture winner to move on. What we're hoping is to make architecture winners again sort of well positioned in the next stage. But other firms, other development teams, if you don't happen to be a winner in the first stage, but you want to try your luck in the second stage, you're open to apply for that as well. So we can answer questions if there are any about that later, but this is the macro structure of the initiative. Now I'm passing it to Ryan.
Thanks, Manas. So across 4 anonymized sites and 2 categories, this design competition is basically occupying a spectrum of density that we find to be missing, so to speak, from our current housing market. And any architect in LA or anywhere in the country will tell you that every site will, of course, have its own unique challenges. But we've picked 4 that we feel to be very prototypical, in that the design solutions that you're going to come up with will be replicable across the entire city. So the first category is gentle density. And that's about, as Dane alluded to, reckoning with this low density fabric that's kind of historically LA. And that's problematic for obvious reasons. I mean, we saw in January that this starts to push people into a wildland urban interface. We know that it produces interminable commutes. And so what we're really asking in gentle density is, how do we densify that fabric, produce a more sustainable, but also a more equitable city, starting from what we have today? In the shared future category, we're at a slightly higher density. And here we're asking, how can typical multifamily arrangements include that same sense of permanence, that same sense of livability, and flexibility even that single family ownership often does? You know, to our minds, densifying LA is as much a hearts and minds issue as it is a legal or a regulatory one. And so we're looking to your design concepts to really illustrate what the future of this city might be. So to guide these proposals, we have provided real zoning information on anonymized sites. And this includes the actual zoning designation and the base yields and the allowable height. If you have already registered for the competition, you should have received that packet. And we won't go through the specifics of this now, though you're welcome to shoot us a note if there are any ambiguities in the information that we've provided. But although we want to ground this competition in the realities of our current development landscape, we also encourage you to approach the competition as an opportunity to experiment. So we are less concerned with strict adherence to today's development climate, with sparking thought and imagination. And so if you do choose to depart from the prescribed allowable envelope and yield, say you go above the allowable height or above the allowable density, or you knowingly break from what would be a legal egress, we ask that you explain why, and maybe even provide some legislative context or suggest some planning tools that would make your solutions feasible. So with that said, we can quickly walk through each of the sites. Site A is a downsloping site in Northeast LA. And this is the lowest density site of the four. Here, we're looking for 2 to 3 units, not including ADUs. And the site information packet has a little more specifics on ways in which you might subdivide the parcel or ways in which you might organize the site itself to achieve that density. We have included this site for a number of reasons. One, because it offers a chance to work in a low density context. So you can see that there are historic single family homes, which might provide you with some sort of like rhetorical presence to illustrate how multifamily futures might be complementary to our present city. It's also a hillside site. So this could be an opportunity to demonstrate some fire resilient landscaping and fire resilient site planning strategies, given its hillside location and being somewhat similar, although not occupied or located in a high fire hazard severity zone. Site B is a flat mid-block lot in central Los Angeles. And here we are slightly denser. We're looking at 4 to 5 units, again, not including ADUs. This site is in a very sort of canonically LA heterogeneous context. There's everything from historic single family homes to 3 to 4 story multifamily buildings in the immediate vicinity. One challenge on this site will be wrestling with the limited height owing to its 1XL height district. And we have included some strategies in the brief for how you might design around that. I'll also note that in both gentle density sites, the building's construction systems are maybe not so different from that of a single family home. So given the impact of the fire rebuild and its effect on the labor pools in Los Angeles, we might encourage you to study how innovative construction systems or modular or panelized building technologies could lead to some efficient building practices given our current building context. Site C is a flat corner alley lot in West LA. And here we're jumping up to the shared future category, so a little bit more typical multifamily scale. Based on our own design and pro forma, we are calling for 18 units of a mixed income development. And that's articulated a little bit more clearly in the site information. I will note that you are welcome to depart from that. We're using TOC. There are many ways in which you might arrive at a higher or lower density, and you shouldn't feel beholden to running with exactly what we've given you, which is based on TOC. I'll also note that it's in a commercial zone, so you are free to include public-facing program if you feel that that's something that would complement your design. And one other challenge here is that this site is 40 feet wide, which is a little bit narrow for multifamily. So you might look at strategies for reducing circulation or maximizing single egress here. And the last site, Site D, this is a flat mid-block site in South Los Angeles. This site has fewer planning and regulatory challenges. So this is where we're really looking for that sense of livability and permanence, and maybe even flexibility as well. You know, how can this be community? How can it be structured to be accessible as a starter home, but adaptable as a forever home? And so the last thing we'll do before we answer questions is just walk through some of the design objectives themselves. I think we've maybe clarified that this is not just about maximizing yield on these 4 sites, nor is it about the most economical possible building strategy, and not downplaying either of those things if that's what your thesis is going to be in this competition. But we're really looking to explore ways of unlocking development strategies that will lead to feasible, beautiful homes across the entire city. So we can quickly walk through the metrics, so to speak, and the goals that we've given our jury that they'll be evaluating your projects by. And the first is staying power. And by that, we are looking for design solutions that can be permanent and affordable. So you might explore shared ownership models, for sale ADUs, tenant in common models, to illustrate that your design is not just responding to today's housing crisis, though it is a crisis, but you are putting forward a lasting solution that will improve our city for generations to come. The next is livability. So again, how can multifamily arrangements reflect that same quality of life as single family homes? Access to outdoors, generous private or semi-private open space, through ventilation, high-performing buildings, and abundant daylight. And building off of that, performance and replicability. What sorts of innovative systems are feasible at low and medium densities? And how can material innovation lower embodied carbon? How can it reduce energy usage and better protect us in the face of a changing climate? Relatedly, resilience, of course, and not just in the material sense, but also site planning and community engagement. We know that we're safer and stronger together. And so not only how are these buildings safe in the face of a changing climate, but how are these buildings fostering a sense of community that can adapt to changing circumstances in the future? And then relatedly, adaptability. So as I alluded to, housing needs change pretty greatly over the course of one's life. And so how can multifamily arrangements help recent grads as they support aging in place? Can they provide a secondary income stream for owners in the face of economic downturns? How can multifamily arrangements help navigate different points of your life in the same way that sometimes single family ownership does? So if that all feels like a lot, if you're wondering where to start, the last thing I'll say before we take questions is, the answer might be closer than you think. And that LA has this proud legacy of innovative and dignified and beautiful workforce housing in the mold of Gregory Ain and Irving Gill and Richard Neutra and so many others, which is to say that, medium density, low density isn't a new idea around here. And bungalow courts and courtyard housing are already so deeply embedded in our civic imagination. And all we're trying to do is refresh and find strategies to unlock them so that LA can become a livable and equitable place for all of us. And with that, we can open this up to some questions.
We can start with some of the common questions that have come up. So there have been a few questions about who can register and can students and professionals register together? Yes, you can, but you would be filed into the professional category in that case. There's another question about whether if a professional designer doesn't have a residential project in the past, would they be disqualified from phase 2? No one will be disqualified. I think that we're looking for younger, less experienced architects, landscape architects and designers on those smaller sites. The larger sites, the city, I'm sure, will privilege people who have a larger portfolio of similar projects. That doesn't mean that anyone is disqualified. Also, there's a question about whether addresses for the lots will be provided. No, they won't. In part because we want these lots to stand for, as Ryan was explaining, a more generic condition. So it's a kind of a delicate balance between giving you specific information, even to the level of having zoning and building envelope information and contextual information. But if you're looking for photographs to contextualize your site. You should be able to find the photographs in similar kinds of conditions elsewhere in the city and use those as the context for your solution. I'll hand it over to Manos. I think there are a few questions that come to you.
Sure. Yeah. One of them is, can applications, or I guess applicants located outside of the US, participate in the competition? Yes, is the answer for sure. We've written this in the brief as well, but a lot of kind of really amazing contributions to LA's residential fabric have come from people outside of the country and other architects and thinkers. So we definitely welcome that. I guess, the challenges that LA is facing are not particularly unique, but having an understanding of LA's residential situation and kind of challenges there would be helpful. But, anyone can apply, and we welcome everyone to apply. Okay, let's see. Then there's a couple of questions about, let's say there's a couple of questions about zoning. One of them is, so are we to abide by the zoning ordinances or maximize the number of units by avoiding those ordinances entirely? Our intention by providing the regulations in the site packet that Ryan was just describing is to ensure that teams are grappling with some of the real challenges that people face when building in Los Angeles. So, I mean, in general, yes, we'd like you to try to abide by the rules that we sent along. However, as Ryan mentioned, if there's a compelling reason for you not to, if you're thinking about something that would show kind of a different alternative, you can do that, and you can explain to us essentially why you've decided to depart from those zoning requirements. But we would rather you don't sort of completely disregard the zoning and just propose something that isn't tied to the current regulations. We think at least that might weaken the proposal. One of the questions also was about a clarification between gentle density and shared future site options. I'd wonder, maybe Ryan answered that well enough in the presentation. Sorry, the follow-on question is, are all options intended to be multifamily homes? We don't want to see any single family homes in this competition. I mean, the sort of minimum number of units we're hoping for is somewhere around 2 to 3. But proposals that get into the sort of smaller scale multifamily buildings, even in the gentle density category, is really what we're trying to show. A building that might be able to fit into a context that's otherwise single family, but not in and of itself be a single family unit.
One question we're seeing is, should the plans and renderings submitted be more schematic and conceptual, or more technical, like a CD and submittal set? Not only, I don't expect anyone here can actually get to a CD level of resolution in the amount of time we've been given you, and that's intentional. But this is really kind of a rhetorical exercise as well. So there's probably too much to grapple with, given the actual obstacles to delivering missing middle housing here. So if I were participating in this competition, I might pick one or a few of them and go deeper on that, such as a construction system or a planning hurdle or a material strategy or a building organization strategy to really unlock. And that can stay fully conceptual. That's our expectation. One other question I'm seeing is about offsite labor. The city has instructed us to pursue every new material and construction innovation avenue possible, and really try to map that back to the feasibility of the projects at this scale. So, in our expertise, or in our analysis, fully modular designs are pretty tough when the unit yield is at this scale, but maybe panelized or other construction systems could work, and we fully support exploring.
I'll take a couple more. Can undergraduates apply in the student classification? Absolutely, we welcome you. Do you have to have a professional license to be a professional? Absolutely not. We consider a professional in this case someone who's out of school. So it's really just distinguishing from students to professional. We'll add a few further clarifications about that in documents that you'll see online. There's an interesting set of questions that I'll pick up about how we think about the affordability and cost questions. It's a really good question. We don't expect you to be doing construction cost estimates in the same way that Ryan was just saying, no one's going to get to technical drawings or pro formas. What we hope is that you'll have some way of indicating the economies you're hoping to achieve. And whether that's from prefabricated modules or some other kind of repetition in your scheme or something like that, you could note that on your drawings, but we aren't going to be double checking for absolute financial feasibility in any of this. We're really, again, emphasizing concepts. And if you have targets for what you think the cost will be, any of that can be included in your descriptive text that's on the board you submit. Ryan, there's a question about contour lines on the sites and if they're indicating 1 foot each.
That's correct. Yes, those are 1 foot contours. It's labeled in the layers, but we can publish that answer so that everyone is aware. Yes, 1 foot contours. Also a question about whether these sites are in city of LA or county of LA, and they are specifically within the city boundaries of Los Angeles. Yeah. Although we have given you the sort of zoning and planning regulations you should need to work with. So I wouldn't encourage you to spend too much time looking up specifics of building in LA. I think we've given you the sort of envelope to wrestle with. And we think that the solutions here are probably replicable across Southern California at large.
I think we've said this in multiple ways, but I just want to underscore that the regulatory context isn't intended to constrain you in ways that leads to some kind of absolute abidance by the rules. We really, and I think this is kind of the way cityLAB sees regulations in general, see those as springboards for thinking about new ways of operating within a set of constraints. If you decide to that you can achieve more by not obeying a constraint, that will not disqualify you. We appreciate it if you indicate why you abandon a particular constraint and what advantage you get from that. That kind of an argument would make a good impression on a jury if you've got a good reason and you achieve something great by doing that.
One sort of hanging logistical question we didn't get to before was, is it possible to change the lot you're working on after registration? It is. I mean, when you've registered, if you haven't gotten the site packet already, you will soon. We've sent the information for all 4 sites and the CAD files for that as well. So if you, in looking at the sites, change your mind, that's okay. Obviously, when you submit, you'll pick a site and tell us your site, and that'll be the site of your board. But if in the interim you change your mind, that's okay with us. Another question, this is kind of maybe spending too much time on the zoning stuff, but it seems like what a lot of people are interested in, so we can talk about it a bit more, is are we to assume any proposed measures are in play? I think the suggestion is like legislation that's coming down the pipe, or maybe things that you've heard are changing in the city. If you haven't taken a look at the site packet yet, I think you'll see we already talk about some legislation. SB 1123 is the one in particular that'll be online in July. So yeah, I mean, sure, I think we'd actually encourage that. If there are things that you see coming, if there are changes that are around the corner that you want to think through, then we'd encourage you to think about that and just kind of tell us what you're thinking about and maybe include some text about that in your narrative. Also a question about the home ownership. So our intention is that the sites and I guess the units on the sites, let's say, would be sold. Now we talked about, though, there's kind of a range of ways in which people might own a unit. There could be a tenant in common type of approach. There could be a shared, let's say, community land trust approach where the land is owned by a different entity versus the units above. Probably easiest to think that kind of each owner is each unit is owned by an individual owner in terms of how you guys think through your proposal, but we'd be open to different alternatives. What we wouldn't like to see and what the city is less interested in are rental schemes. So sort of like traditional rental apartments is something that we want to push a little further and think we have the opportunity to do so in this initiative. So we should do that.
The elephant in the room is in one question, which is, let me see if I can read it. how is it that a person who enters a design competition would get to build on a site? I think I'm paraphrasing that correctly. That's the $1 million question, of course. There's a link between the design competition and the RFQ for development teams, but it's not a direct link. Winners from the design competition will have an opportunity to be given expert consulting, linked with cityLAB's lending partners, with developers that we've been working with, so that you can form very strong teams to move into the RFQ process. The RFQ process is a city-based process that is one that will follow a point system, like many of you have probably experienced in the past. And we have guided the point system to correspond to all of the goals that are in the design competition. But there will be no direct guarantee that there will be a winner in the design competition that will also win the RFQ. We see the particularly strong link being between the general density sites and the RFQ process, where the city will be more open to creative new kinds of teams and younger and more emerging developers and architects and landscape architects. I don't know, Manos or Ryan, do you want to add anything to that?
I think you said that well, Dana. It's about sort of putting together the most competitive applications. That's what we're able to do. That's what we're committed to doing. But the city process needs to remain open and transparent. And thus, that's sort of the intention that we have with really trying to benefit architecture competition winners, let's say, to help the applications be particularly strong.
We are committed to getting projects built on these sites. I think that much
Also worth saying, yeah.
is worth saying. And we are going to do everything we can to see that the design competition winners move into competitive positions to be awarded those sites. Someone else asked, okay, going back to more logistical things, is this about home ownership? Is it rent to own? I think Manos addressed that already, but it's all about, it's not rental properties. I think the city really was the one who pushed the idea of home ownership in whatever form you could imagine, because that's where we have really no models at the moment for affordable housing for the vast majority of young people who want to stay in the city. And we really think of that as part of the staying power idea of this competition.
Another question here, who should be the conceptual client or clients? Is there a median income range, or should we speculate on our own about the end user? As we've been thinking through this, as we've been running financial tests and some architectural tests, we've been imagining mixed income buildings. So imagine a development is 8 units or so, maybe 3 or 4 of those units would be affordable to people making around the median income in LA. The rest of them might be a little bit more expensive at market rate. Because of the size of these projects, some version of this, where there's kind of some market rate units subsidizing some more affordable units, seems to us to be the most feasible path forward. But if you have another idea or can think of something else, then we welcome your proposal, and we'll help you think through it as well. But that's what we're imagining. You're open to think about whatever clients you want, but mixed income is probably where we think most projects will land.
I also just want to say that just because we are in the weeds about that, all of this, you don't need to be in the weeds.
Sure.
You can think about it in a much broader sense. Maybe you want to think about what kinds of people we ought to be encouraging to stay in Los Angeles, and you can posit them as your clients. You don't have to give them an income range. You don't have to think about area median income. If that doesn't inspire your solution, you shouldn't worry about it.
There was also a question, I think we answered it kind of directly in the, I guess, Q&A feature, but it's related to one that's up here on our document, about, the question here is, we're a design build firm and would be interested in building our own design. One of the questions in the chat, I think, had been, if there's an architect who intends to work with a certain developer in phase 2, should they still, apply to the design competition? In both cases, we'd strongly suggest yes, both to kind of gather as many ideas as possible. Second, to, again, kind of have the resources to make that second level application as strong as possible. And I think we'd all really benefit from seeing kind of architects and developers connected, or at least how those might work together between phase one and phase two. So yes, even if you're kind of your eyes on the second phase, if you're interested in this first phase as well, we'd really love for you to apply.
It's not required. You don't have to have participated in the design competition to enter the RFQ process.
Yes, that's true.
One question here is, being a young firm starting out, providing a portfolio with 10 plus examples can be challenging. How can we navigate this? We are really looking to build capacity and working to lower the threshold of approval requirements in the RFQ. So please don't let that be something that stops you from submitting. Put together the portfolio you have and use this, perhaps if you have the time and bandwidth, as another entry in your portfolio. But we are, very dedicated to reaching new architects and emerging firms with this competition.
We may have expended most of the questions. Is there any others that you think we should address, Ryan and Manos? As they're looking, I see both found something.
I guess just to, if people are sort of worried as well, as Dana mentioned, we'll go through, we'll do our best to answer all the questions. First of all, we'll publish this online, and then we'll go through to answer the questions that we haven't gotten to in this session as well. So hopefully everyone's questions will get answered at least in some way in the coming days.
And you
One
should be able
question.
to submit further questions through info at
certainly.
small lots.
Almost smalllots.info@ucla.edu is
Okay.
the right email. You find that on our website. Please send any questions you have. Ryan, you were gonna bring one up.
One question here is the city donating the land for phase two? And that's a little bit in the weeds, but the city is making its land available, and there are actually pros and cons to the city donating its land. So we would like to make that option available to a development team for what would probably be a very, very affordable long-term lease on one end, or actually a at-market sale with subsidy through existing homeownership programs. So there's a number of ways that we've explored the city disposing of the land, and that can be tied to your development model when you're a little bit further along and have a developer on board and a full team fleshed out.
Great. I think we should probably let people get on with their evenings. It's very reassuring to see the level of interest. We are here to continue to work with you and answer questions as the competition rolls out. We want to underscore that the competition deadline was extended until May 4th. So there's an extra 2 weeks that we hope will encourage even more of you to submit. So thank you again for joining. Be sure and send us any questions. Stay tuned to the website where we will post all the FAQs as they arise. Thank you.
Great.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your
Thank you.
interest.